Well, speaking of negligence and partisanship, there is yet another sexual harassment claim coming out of conservative media. It's being brought by former host on The Blaze, Sydney Watson, and she's suing the media company over the behavior of her former co-host, Elijah Schaffer, and problematic behavior that she says she complained about for months and that went unaddressed as she suffered his abuse on their show. And there is a deep expose on this at the Daily Beast, where they detail some of the problems she had. They say Watson thought Schaffer was setting her up to fail, insisting on grossly misogynistic guests and even joking on Twitter about how he wanted her to sleep with talk radio host Sebastian Gorka. According to Watson, Schaffer was often drunk on set, slugging shots of liquor around recording time. He was obsessed with talking about sex, often specifically gay sex, and would talk about it frequently around her and their guests. Schaffer was ultimately fired from The Blaze in September after allegedly drunkenly assaulting another Blaze media host by groping her breast. At that time, The Blaze tweeted he had been fired for violating company policies and standards, but Watson's claims in her lawsuit say that executives at The Blaze knew that Schaffer's problems with female employees went back far earlier. She said that once she received her co-hosting spot at The Blaze, he insisted on inviting guests like white nationalist leader Nick Fuentes, and in her account, Watson found herself set up as Schaffer's foil on the show, frequently embarrassed by her co-host and tricked into reading anti-Semitic messages from Schaffer's far-right fans aloud on the show. It became a running gag for Mr. Schaffer and his audience that some of Mr. Schaffer's fans would leave super chat comments with coded dog whistles that referenced grossly misogynistic and or anti-Semitic comments from Ms. Watson to read, with her not knowing what they meant. The complaint reads.
I have to hop in there because
I'll pause there. There's more, but let's pause there.
Yeah. I watched their show they did together. It was called You Are Here. It was interesting, but kind of wild. And that part is 100% true. They would comment things and then Elijah would have her read them and she wouldn't know what she was saying because it's like weird alt-right internet edgelord code language. That is 100% true. All this reporting is coming from Sydney's complaint, which is the lawsuit, the legal document. So it is only one side of the story, to be fair. But that part I can personally say is true because I watched the show and I saw it happen. It's also worth noting that Sydney, who I'm friendly with, she is, kind of an anti-feminist in some ways. She's a conservative woman, a kind of strong, powerful woman, but she's not like a woke feminist, right? For her to be saying that this was an environment with sexual harassment and sexism rife throughout it has to be bad, right? It's not like woke, frivolous complaints about how they set the thermostat, right? And how that's sexist. But it's also her lawyer, Kurt Schlichter, is a very Republican, MAGA, super conservative guy. I mean, this is not like, clearly this has more going on here than just some sort of ideological bias or dispute. And I have to say, I find her very credible. I think, I don't know what happened. Obviously, we have a statement here from The Blaze that said that the claims alleged in this complaint are false. We look forward to prevailing in this matter where the plaintiff's statements, emails, and text messages will show in her own words why this case might generate publicity but will fail on the merits. So we have to kind of include the caveat that this is only one side of the story, and The Blaze says this isn't true. But I have to say I believe her. I find her very credible. She's a serious person. She wouldn't do something like this unless there was a real meaning to it, I believe. And it tracks. I've been inside conservative media companies and they have a consistent problem. We've seen this at all the big conservative media companies. We hear whispers about it all the time of not living out their values of, chivalry and traditional values and traditional men and respecting women and pro-family and all these things. But then you hear about a lot of these conservative companies and on the insides, they operate more like frat houses, degenerate frat houses, than they actually do, respectable institutions with family values. So it tracks with a much broader trend.
Well, I have to push back on you and one thing that you said, which is that thermostats are sexist, and I won't hear otherwise, because there is good data showing companies would save thousands of dollars per year if they would simply make it a little bit warmer in the offices where women would be comfortable, and yet they continue to blast everybody with freezing cold air to keep the hot-bodied men in their suits comfortable. Meanwhile, every woman I know who works in office has a heater under their desk on round the clock. It is sexist, and it needs to change. Aside from that, everything you said was spot on. For context, guys, Sydney Watson is actually one of the people who appeared on the Vice feminism panel that Brad and I reacted to on the show, and she was one of the anti-feminists on the show.
She's the Australian, people will remember. The only one who we agreed with at all.
Right. The only one who had any good points throughout the entire segment. But she certainly is not some sort of woke activist here. And these seem to be things that were going down on air that people could observe. So I think it's fair to, wait and see what happens in lawsuits. But I'm also inclined to believe her. The Blaze suspended their show in May, according to her lawsuit. The company fired Watson in July after a lawyer working for her complained to the company about Schaffer's actions. They say the Blaze instead opted to cater to the demands, tantrums, and misbehavior of another young rising star. A male one who, long after Ms. Watson had been terminated for complaining and demanding justice, was finally fired based on allegations that he physically assaulted and manhandled at least one other female, the Blaze employee. The complaint reads, Watson had signed a multi-year deal with Blaze Media that she claims was worth nearly $1.3 million. So I thought this was really infuriating to read, and you were absolutely correct in saying this is something you and I have observed across
many... just sorry, before you go on, it sounds like she was also fired in retaliation for complaining, allegedly, according to her complaint, which that in and of itself is not allowed.
And yet we see it all the time. This subject makes me a little mad because I am a very upfront person and I'm inclined to name names right now. But I have to be honest, I'm even a little bit fearful to do that because there is so much retaliation in our industry. Even if you don't work in-house somewhere, just saying some of the practices that go on in these companies, naming some of the bad men who continue to be at the top of their craft, who continue to be protected by these organizations, knowing some of the things they do behind the scenes. It is infuriating to me. And it was one thing that deterred me as I was moving into media from wanting to go in-house at any of these places. I've often had people ask, when are you going to go in-house here? When are you going to go in-house there? And I'm like, I started my own company for a reason. And that is that there are very few good institutions to go work for as a woman, but it really is anybody who is a principled person of character when you get into the realm of entertainment and media. And that has just been my experience across music, across movies, and now in politics. And it's very disappointing because these groups, many of them proclaim family values, claim to care about individual liberty, claim to not have these issues, and yet they're rampant with them. And they do tend to go in one direction where they protect the men who are typically the bad actors in these situations, and they treat the women as if they are disposable. And I find this really disheartening. It's one thing you and I talked a lot about when we were starting Base Politics, was creating an environment where we can have jobs, good jobs for content creators who are principled, who won't sell out, and also good jobs in the sense that when they're here, we treat them well, we treat them with dignity, we give them autonomy, we live out our values, and we make sure that it is a safe environment, especially for women to work in. That's one thing you and I have been really passionate about behind the scenes, is trying to amplify the voices of women. That's one thing I've always loved about you, Brad, is you're very passionate about that. And I think that that's so rare in our industry. And I hate to see this. I don't personally know Sydney or have a relationship with her, but I know many other women who have been in almost identical situations to this one. And it's really infuriating. It keeps happening.
And people will say, oh, well, she's suing. She just wants money or publicity, like they said in the statement. That's not really fair for a few reasons, but one of which is that change never happens until people go public. So, for example, I have firsthand experience in one conservative media system where there was widespread kind of inappropriate behavior towards women in the office, and it was complained about, it was known, it was discussed, yet nothing happened until it went public, and it was reported on, and it was like a scandal. Then there was an investigation, people were let go, action happened. So I don't think it's fair to throw shade at people for going public or going legal on stuff like this. Couldn't you just work inside the house? Couldn't you try to fix it? We're all on a team, aren't we? Blah, blah, blah. No, that's not really how it works. It'd be nice if it worked that way. That's not really how it works most of the time in practice.
Secondarily, a lot of these women get blacklisted. That's the other hard truth right here, is that when you do complain inside the system, you often are fired. And when you are fired, you often are then blacklisted and other companies won't hire you. Suing is no small decision. From any woman I've spoken to who's gone through this process, they usually go into it knowing they're never going to work in TV again. And they won't, especially if they win. If you become a woman who brought a lawsuit like this against a media company, the other media companies simply won't hire you because they'll see you as too big of a risk or a liability. And so you really are in a rock and a hard place as a woman when you're in these situations of, do you complain? Do you come forward in the first place? Because the opportunity costs are significant. And that's honestly why a lot of women put up and shut up and deal with it, because they want to keep their careers that they've worked so hard for. And so it's a very sad reality behind the scenes. And I just want listeners to know, like, this is prevalent and it is a really big problem in our movement.